What a blessing to be with all of you this morning, and especially with our friends who are listening and watching online. We are so glad that you have joined us. When I think about my childhood and the way I was brought up decades ago, there was a societal expectation during that time that when one received a gift or a kind word or a favor, one was to reciprocate with a thank you. That's right. You were to say thank you. And if somebody gave you a compliment or offered you something nice and there was an adult around, right, the adult would quickly impart to the child, now what are you supposed to say, right? I don't know about you, but when my parents did that, what are you supposed to say? I would just feel kind of embarrassed, right? And I have no doubt that my eyes would divert to the ground and I would say in a very monotone voice, thank you. I've learned to be much more expressive with my thank yous now. And maybe it's just me, but it seems that as the world continues to change, nothing odd about that, it will always change. But in our world today, we're living in a time where there seems to be an attitude of entitlement. You ever notice that? More and more people, it feels as if people no longer feel inclined to say any kind of thanks to others because they feel this, an attitude of privilege maybe. I think it's interesting to note that the phrase thank you hasn't really disappeared from our vernacular, but I think people use it very parsimoniously, very stingily, right? And if you agree with me, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It even seems as if our acknowledgement of God, when we have an attitude of gratitude toward God, it doesn't even seem to really be even directed toward God. People do this all the time. For example, somebody will say, oh, I just broke a fingernail, but thank God I have a clipper in my pocket, right? Or, oh, my team fumbled the football. Oh, they got it back, thank God. It's just an expression. There really is, when they say things like that, there is no real attitude of gratitude towards God. So, how very appropriate that in the week ahead, we as a nation, we're just going to pause and give a very heartfelt thanks to God for all the blessings in our lives. As we gather together as family to ask the Lord's blessing as we enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday. Thanksgiving holiday. You know, the word holiday actually comes from an old English expression. Holiday actually means holy day. Did you know that? Holiday, holy day. Defining that time, that day, that occasion as a very sacred time to enter in upon God's holy presence. Now, unfortunately, over the years, it seems like we have lost that focus of it being a holy day, and it truly is just a holiday of festivities and traditions and lots of good food and all the sports that we like to watch. But that's become that primary means of observing this holy day, this holiday. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of go back and look at how did this holiday even become into reality? What is this holy day? Well, history reveals that foreigners seeking to escape from oppression and persecution in their own country came here to the Americas as a way to seek a new and better life. To leave whatever oppression they were facing and come to a place that would provide safe haven. The refugees came ashore in 1601 in a place that they would eventually call Plymouth Rock, in a state that we now refer to as Massachusetts. And these travelers, by the way, we often refer to them as pilgrims, settled down in this newfound land, and the first thing they did was to give thanks to God for getting them to a safe place, a new place, an unthreatening place. And they established relationships with the inhabitants who had settled there before they had settled there, in this place that became identified as the Americas. And so these first inhabitants eventually became known as Native Americans. Now there was a challenge with these immigrants. They didn't come with enough food to survive. And as winter hit and their meager supplies dwindled, these pilgrims literally struggled to survive. But there's no indication that the Native Americans tried to send them back. No, what history records is that for the most part, these Native Americans welcomed the immigrants. Welcomed the immigrants and fed them and helped them to establish their colony by teaching them where and how to hunt and fish in this mysterious new land, how to grow corn and harvest it, how to identify edible from poisonous plants in this new land. Reached out to offer them every opportunity to feel welcomed and safe in this new place. Now, our bishop of the Missouri Conference of the United Methodist Church, our Bishop Robert Snazy, he has a phrase for when people go out of the norm, out of the expected, out of the ordinary to do or give something out of gratitude for another person in need. He calls it radical hospitality. Yeah, radical hospitality. And these original inhabitants and these brand new immigrants, they got together and they celebrated their new friendship. They even broke bread together. Their way that they gave thanks to God was through a meal. They broke bread together. Now, why is it a big deal that they broke bread? Because part of our story, the story of Christianity emerges from the story of Israel and our Jewish ancestors. And we know that in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, when one broke bread with another, it was a sacred moment, a sacred time. In fact, biblical scholars say that the norm back then, if you were invited to my house and I broke bread with you, I became responsible for you. I would take care of you no matter what. That's how sacred breaking bread was. So I think it's extraordinary that as these immigrants come to the new Americas and the inhabitants that already live there, they break bread together, something very sacred, very holy. And so this first Thanksgiving meal provided a model to be used throughout time. But it wasn't really until much later that there was any regular observance of a Thanksgiving time as a holy day or a holiday of Thanksgiving. It wasn't really until 1863 when President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed or designated that the third Thursday of every November would be a holy day, a holiday. And then in 1941, it was designated as a federal holiday. So everybody got off of work to go home and eat turkey. But this holy day of thanks really began with a group of a mere 100 people who got on a tiny boat called the Mayflower and set shore for a safe place where they could experience religious freedom and a sense of prosperity and certainly a sense of blessing. And when at last they reached that shore of the Americas that we know as the East Coast, they were welcomed. Say that word with me. Welcomed to this new, safe place of blessing where they were welcomed and offered an opportunity to begin their life anew. My friends, let us not forget that this is the story of Thanksgiving. A people who were oppressed and struggled to be free, and when at last they reached a place, a safe haven, they were not rejected, they were welcomed. Welcomed. So how ironic for us as we prepare to observe a holy day, a holiday of Thanksgiving, that we still have refugees who are yearning to come to the safe haven of the Americas. And they come just as ill-prepared as those 17th century pilgrims. They don't know the customs, they don't know the norms, they don't know the vernacular, they don't know the phrases we speak. In other words, they don't know where to hunt and fish and grow crops. The question we have as a country that we struggle with right now is, will we offer radical hospitality? I'm not going to imply there's an easy answer to this, and we should struggle with this. And I think the answer that we eventually come to, I hope, will be based upon our own hearts and our minds and not driven by what folks would say that we ought to do, should do out of fear, but what we ought to do, should do out of the voice of Christ that's in our head and in our hearts. Because I really do believe that if Jesus were here today, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think Jesus would clearly say, welcome those who are in need. Welcome those who have been oppressed. and seek safe passage and safe harbor. Welcome those who want to escape danger and oppression. You know, our story is one of pilgrimage, and I mean long before Christianity. There's the story of these people who were oppressed, and they left their place of oppression, of slavery, and they traveled a very arduous, a very difficult, challenging journey in order to reach one day their promised land. And that long and treacherous exodus from captivity only ended when they were able to enter into a new place of safety, a place of expectation, of new life, of a better life. And they eventually got there after 40 long years. And in response, a poet sat down and wrote poetry to tell of this tale of God being in all of creation throughout humankind, of God being with them in their time of oppression, of God being with them as they traveled through a desert, God being with them as they found new and safe land in which to live. You've probably read this poetry. You may have a copy of this poetry in your home. If you have a Bible, you have this poetry. It is Psalm 136. And it is a poem. It's a hymn, actually. We know that the Psalms, we call them the Psalter. The Psalms are an old hymn book, just like the hymn books that are in our pews. This hymn book, the music's been lost presumably forever, but we still have the poetry, the lyric. And in this particular hymn, this particular poetry, 136, the writer is writing about how God's steadfast love endures forever no matter what. I'm going to ask that we recite this prayer together as a call and response. I will read or I will call, and you will respond wherever it says on the screen. You will say out loud, "For his steadfast love endures forever." Listen to this poetic story of God delivering people from oppression to freedom, of God's steadfast love which endures forever. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. Oh, give thanks to the God of gods. Oh, give thanks to the Lord of lords, who alone does great wonders, who by understanding made the heavens, who spread out the earth on the waters, who made the great lights and the sun to rule over the day, the moon and the stars to rule over the night, who struck Egypt through their firstborn, and brought Israel out from among them, with a strong hand and an outreached arm, who divided the Red Sea into two, and made Israel to pass through the midst of it, and overthrew Pharaoh and his army in that Red Sea, who then led his people through the wilderness, who struck down great kings and killed famous kings, Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, and gave them their land as a heritage to his servant Israel. It is he who remembered us in our low estate, and rescued us from our foes, who gives food to all flesh. Oh, give thanks to the God of heaven forever, forever, forever. There's nothing you can experience in life, and I know some of you have experienced great challenges. You have known, you have experienced, you have felt what it's like to be in a foreign place where people despise and reject you. You know what it's like to journey and travel, either literally or spiritually or emotionally, through a desert time where it's dry and uncomfortable and hopeless, and you're trying to get to a place of promise. And my prayer is, at the very least, that you have found a safe place in God's bosom in this church, if nowhere else. That in being in this place, you give thanks to God. If nothing else, you have a place to worship where someone's not going to come in and take your life because you choose to worship God. That you have people who surround you in these pews and in this community who love you and pray for you and care for you. Or give thanks to God that God has put you in a place of what others would see as privilege, that you can bless others through the gifts that you have in your life, that you can pray for others, comfort others, provide for others in their time of need, in whatever foreign place that they have been. And I hope that our community, and certainly our church community, would be a safe refuge for any foreign person, whether they live across the street or come from a foreign land. That we'd be willing to open our homes and our hearts and open our lives to give them a safe place. Just as through the ages those opportunities have been given to us and to our ancestors. I really believe that if Jesus were here today, he wouldn't say, bolt the doors and hope no one else gets in. I really think Jesus would say, care for those who need caring. Love the unloved. And it may mean that we need to do it in very meticulous and very safe ways, but it doesn't mean that we ever say no. Don't allow the women and the children, don't allow people who are seeking freedom to not find safe refuge in a church or in a Christian community. Now, this poetry of thanks was written by people who went through untold oppression, not only under slavery with the Pharaoh in Egypt 4,000 years ago, but 40 years of traveling through the desert until they found their promised land, a land of milk and honey. And my prayer would be that as we gather this week to observe this holy day, this holiday of Thanksgiving, that you will experience it as a holy day. For the time that God has traveled with you through the hard struggles and brought you out to a time of promise, of new opportunity, of safety. And I want you to also recognize that in the sacred day of this holiday of Thanksgiving, it is so appropriate to give thanks to God for all that God has done. So you may get up Thursday morning and you really don't have anything to do. It's going to be a quiet day for you. You may just be reading a book. What a great time to just spend that day throughout the day just saying, thank you, God. Over and over, thank you, God. You may be rushing off to be with family, or you're waiting for family to come be with you, and there'll be a great excitement and enthusiasm and a cacophony of voices and a clatter of kitchenware and TV on and sports being played and all of that. Take time to just pause, if even for yourself, and just say, thank you, God. Thank you, God, for the blessings in your life.